So, 5 Chinese 747 cargo planes have vanished near Iran. No one really knows what they were carrying, but the timing has definitely raised some eyebrows. These aircraft left China on June 15th, 16th and 17th, right after Israeli strikes on Iran. They flew over northern China, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan before, well, disappearing from radar near Iranian airspace. Officially, these planes were supposed to be heading for Europe, but, none of them ever actually made it there. Considering that these freighters often haul heavy military gear, their disappearance has fueled a lot of speculation about covert arms transfers. Granted, the flights might have been innocent or maybe just digital anomalies. There's no hard proof they landed in Iran, but honestly, the speculation isn't baseless. China really does have good reason to back Iran. Up to 16% of China's seaborne crude imports come from Iran, and if you count the whole Gulf region, it's 53%. If Israel destroys Iran's energy infrastructure, or if the Strait of Hormuz gets blocked, the fallout won't just stop with Tehran, it could ripple all the way to Beijing. That's a cost China is, frankly, unlikely to accept quietly. But, there's an even bigger picture here. If the war escalates and drags in the United States, China gets exactly what it needs: strategic depth. A drawn-out conflict in Iran would tie down U.S. attention, drain its resources, and force Washington into a war it didn't really plan for and can't easily exit. Every dollar America spends fighting Iran is one less dollar spent deterring China. And as Washington sinks deeper into another forever war, China would be free to focus on what it really wants: Taiwan. Now, this isn't meant to single out China. America has done the same and would again if the roles were reversed. But from a realpolitik perspective, this could be the opportunity Beijing has been waiting for, and it may not come again. After all, China's best weapon is America's attention span. Today's video is, for most of its post-revolutionary history, Iran has struggled to find a reliable great power to lean on. For a time, that appeared to be Russia, but the truth is, Moscow was never a dependable partner. It promised Iran advanced air defense systems and combat aircraft but delivered late or not at all. Part of the reason is that Russia doesn't want to upset Israel. It may sound strange, but Russian-Israeli ties run deeper than many realize. Over 1 million Israelis speak Russian. The two countries have coordinated military operations in Syria, and behind the scenes their defense industries maintain quiet lines of cooperation. In short, Russia has too much to lose by fully backing Iran. That mistrust goes both ways though. For its part, Iran has consistently sought to maintain open relations with Europe, whether through trade, diplomacy, or energy cooperation. As a result, its regional goals have often clashed with Russia's, especially in the Caucasus and Central Asia. So the alliance, as it stands, is built on convenience, not commitment. China, by contrast, follows a different playbook. If it chooses to deepen its role, the groundwork is already in place. Beijing has no colonial past in the Middle East, no emotional baggage, and no overlapping territorial ambitions. It simply wants oil, trade, and influence, and it is willing to invest for the long term. In 2021, for instance, Iran and China signed a 25-year partnership that went far beyond symbolic diplomacy. The agreement outlined long-term cooperation in energy, infrastructure, telecommunications, and military development. At its core, the deal provided China with guaranteed access to Iranian oil at steeply discounted rates, while offering Iran billions in investment tied to the Belt and Road Initiative. It also opened the way to Chinese involvement in Iranian ports, railroads, and digital networks. For Iran, the deal was a means to survive isolation, while for China, it was a chance to entrench itself in the Middle East without firing a shot. But China's influence isn't just economic, it's strategic. Consider Syria. Tehran backed Assad at a time when America and Europe were calling for regime change. That support wasn't about loyalty, it was cold calculation. Assad was isolated and under pressure. Propping him up gave Iran a foothold in a collapsing state. Weak allies, after all, are easier to shape. China holds the same playbook today. Whether it chooses to use it remains to be seen. Iran has taken severe blows from Israel, but it hasn't collapsed, at least not yet. A moment of real vulnerability may not be far off, and that's when China could step in. Not to save Iran, but to reshape it using deals, loans, and weapons bound by strings. Iran wouldn't become a Chinese satellite overnight, but it could be nudged into something else, dependent, indebted, and strategically useful. Admittedly, much of this premise rests on circumstances still in motion. But if any country is positioned to capitalize on this conflict, it's China. Every war invites new players. The longer the conflict between Israel and Iran drags on, the more likely it is that outside powers get pulled in. For China, that's both a risk and an opportunity. A short war leaves Beijing watching from the sidelines, but a prolonged one, especially one that draws in the United States, creates space for China to act. If the United States intervenes militarily, meaning full-scale, sustained combat, and Iran manages to hold out just long enough to avoid total collapse, China could quietly step in. Not with troops, but with equipment such as combat aircraft, air defenses, guided missiles, and satellite support, all the technologies Tehran either lacks or produces only in limited quantities. If that support flows in quietly, consistently, and under the radar, Iran would turn into, well, a forever war. To be clear, this material support wouldn't win the war for Iran, but it would prolong hostilities, and that potentially is the point. You see, China doesn't need Iran to win, it would just need Iran to survive and bleed United States resources. That alone would stretch America's political capital and logistics on a war with, honestly, no clear exit. It would mirror what the United States has done to Russia in Ukraine, create a front that slowly drains the adversary over time. A drawn-out conflict like that would play right into Beijing's hands, not because China cares about the Middle East, ideology, international law, or even Iran, but because it buys time. A distracted United States gives Beijing breathing room in East Asia, allowing it to focus its efforts on a tiny place called Taiwan. So while Washington is tied down in another forever war, China buys time to strengthen its naval posture, test responses around Taiwan, and shift global narratives. A distracted America gives Beijing its best chance to move on Taiwan. Washington simply cannot sustain two major confrontations at once, especially if one of them turns into a slow, grinding campaign. Beijing wouldn't even need to act right away. The mere fact that Washington is bogged down shifts the strategic map naturally. This outcome would depend on how long the United States stays engaged and, honestly, how discreetly Beijing plays its hand. But, you know, it would be a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Either way, it would give China a free hand to reshape the balance of power in the Asia-Pacific, while America, well, looks the other way. Every lifeline is also a leash. If Iran accepts Chinese support, it won't come free. Just as Assad became dependent on Iran and Russia to stay in power, Tehran may be forced into a similar role, this time as China's proxy. And once that shift happens, Iran may find it is no longer the one calling the shots. Should Iran come to rely on Chinese weapons, financing, and diplomatic cover, Beijing will expect influence in return, not total control, but enough to shape Tehran's decisions and, pull the strings when it really counts. That would place Iran in a difficult position. Foreign backing might help it survive the war, but honestly, it would come at the cost of strategic autonomy. The clearest example is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's ability to threaten global oil shipments through the strait is one of its strongest deterrents. But if China becomes its patron, that option pretty much disappears. Around half of China's crude oil imports come from the Gulf region. It depends on those same oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz and honestly wouldn't tolerate disruptions to its own energy security. In other words, Iran's greatest strength could become off-limits. Not because it lacks the capability, but because it no longer has the authority to use it. That's the paradox of becoming a proxy. Survival comes at the cost of independence. The more Iran leans on China, the more it risks being treated the way Assad was treated by Iran and Russia, kept afloat but, closely controlled. Decisions about war, trade, and foreign policy would increasingly run through Beijing. And for a revolutionary state that has long prided itself on sovereignty, that may be the hardest price of all. But if the pieces fall into place, Beijing may already be getting ready for what comes next. The truth is, most forever wars start with a timeline, but then miss